Hi everybody, Margaret Moorhead here. What you're going to see next is a 15-minute video about specialty feet for your sewing machine. This information is taken from a 1-hour webinar that I did for my premium members, and it was such a huge success with them that I decided to pull out a few highlights to share with you now. But for this webinar, I'm going to just talk about one foot and give it 3 different functionalities. So the first thing we can do with this foot is lace joining. When you look at the picture on the left, hopefully you can see the blade going down the center of it. If you look just in front of the blade, you'll see the lace and you can see it's slightly held apart. That's because of the blade, and that's a wonderful feature. When you're stitching lace together, you don't want it to overlap. You want it to just butt up to each other. So because you have that blade there, it will keep your lace lined up perfectly, but because the blade is so narrow, when it gets back to the needle part, the left swing of the needle will go to the left piece of lace, and the right swing of the needle will go to the right piece of lace. You're using a zigzag, and your results are going to be perfect. The lace pieces are going to lay exactly next to each other, and you're not going to get any overlap. You're going to love the results that you get. You can also use this foot, as a stitch in the ditch foot. So what that means is you can place the blade in the ditch. Well, what is a ditch? A ditch is basically a groove anywhere 2 pieces of fabric are joined. So anywhere you have a seam. On the right side, it just gives you this little groove. And what you can do is stick the blade in that groove, and then you don't have to look at your needle. You just stitch a straight stitch, and those stitches should go directly into that groove. The other thing this can do is can be used as a narrow edge stitch. So what you can do is finish your project. It could be a coaster, a wall hanging, whatever it is, finish it and take the finished edge of that project and butt it up against the blade of the foot. Then move your needle over. In the picture you see here, my needle has been moved all the way to the left, and it's stitching a nice edge stitch around this project. First thing you're going to do is put your fabric wrong side up, so the right side against the feed dogs. You're going to make sure the foot is completely on the fabric. You're going to have a little bit of fabric hanging out the back so you can maneuver your fabric around. You can hold it in the front and the back and get that all lined up nice and neat. So here you have a side view, and you can see the fabric is not lined up really nice and neat, but I'm just getting it started. At this point, I go ahead and lower the foot so the foot can hold the fabric in place. The next thing we see is a front photo of this. Now when you look at this is not lined up correctly either. The fabric's not laying very nice. It's not going to roll correctly. And if you look at the right, over to the right part of the foot, you see that there's some fabric underneath that foot. That is not going to work out well. We need to make a few more adjustments. So when we look at this one, we can see we're getting better. It's really not under the right part of the foot anymore, but look just beyond the green arrow. Can you see that the fabric is not laying flat? There's some extra fabric in there, and it's not going to work right. It's going to cause you to have an uneven, not very pretty hem. So we need to work on maneuvering our fabric some more. This is what you want. When you look at the left arrow, you see the raw edge and it's laying nice and neat. When you look at the right arrow, you see the fold of the fabric. This fabric fills up the entire opening of this foot from left to right. There's no excess fabric. The raw edge is now going to curl or roll nicely, and the whole hem is going to be stitched very nicely, exactly how it's supposed to. What's nice about this is the developers of the feet made it the exact right size. I used to think that, oh, I need to put a little bit more fabric in there to make it roll under just a little bit more so I can catch it and it won't come undone. Not true. If you have that fabric taking up the entire opening of that foot, you have plenty of fabric for it to roll under, be caught by the needle, and form a perfect hem. Look at that hem. It lays perfectly flat. What you want to do is insert a twin needle and thread the needle. When I thread the needle, I have two pieces of thread coming from the top of the machine. I hold them as if I only had one, and I thread it just like I do any other time I'm threading my machine. When I get down to the needle, I then separate those two threads, put one in the right needle and one in the left needle. Before, I've drawn a line to follow for my first pin tuck. That line is lined up with an indentation on my foot. And I want to point that out because that's where the pin tuck is going to stitch. It is not going to stitch to the right of that indentation. That opening is just so you can go ahead and pull your threads easily under the needle and under the foot, and it gives you so your threads don't get tangled when you begin to sew. Once you've got the first row done, you've pulled it out, you've clipped your threads, take that pin tuck and line it up under any groove in the pin tuck foot that you want. In this example, I've lined it up right next to where the next pin tuck will stitch so that the pin tucks are going to be very, very close together. As you're stitching, the first pin tuck will just ride along in that groove and the next pin tuck will stitch right next to it and you'll get beautiful results. It's been done using a different foot on a different machine. This foot uses it has a bigger groove, so I'm using a bigger cord. I'm not using the GIMP that I used. I'm using a bigger cord. It's a nylon cord that I got in the drapery department. So here you see I stitched my first pin tuck and then I left a gap and I stitched the second pin tuck. And you may not actually be able to see that except for now that I'm stitching the third pin tuck, you can see that the center where the pin tuck is currently stitching is in the center groove. Then there's a groove that does not have a pin tuck in it. And then on the far right is where the pin tuck is lined up. So the spacing on these pin tucks is going to be different than the spacing on the previous ones. Now I want to give you a hint for stitching rows and rows and rows of pin tucks. When my kids were little, I did a lot of heirloom sewing, and I probably stitched millions of pin tucks. A good thing to do is cut a strip of fabric and then sew that strip of fabric into a cylinder. So you're going to sew the two ends together. If you look at the top left-hand picture, you see that there's a seam there. I've stitched all the way around on my first pin tuck, and I've come back up where I started and completed that circle. So I've stitched one pin tuck. Now all I need to do is pick up my foot and move my fabric to the right, line my already stitched pin tuck in whatever groove of the foot that I want, and stitch the next pin tuck. So that's what you see in the bottom right graphic. I have a pin tuck stitched, I have a blank groove, and then I have the next pin tuck. So I'll stitch that all the way around, get back to the beginning, and repeat that process. Once I have all the pin tucks stitched that I want, simply cut that seam off. So then you'll have a flat strip of fabric that's filled with pin tucks. Flip it over to the wrong side. Now let's talk about the gathering foot.
When you're working with the gathering foot, the way you adjust how loose or tight your gathers are through the stitch length and the tension. So that's how you adjust it. But know that you're going to need to do a test to be sure you get the results you want, because the type of fabric that you use can make a difference also on your results. So in the bottom you see the pin tuck foot and you see some of the fabric that's been gathered. So what are we going to do? The first thing you're going to do is do a test and figure out mathematically how tight or loose you want these gathers. So start with a piece of fabric, let's say 20 inches long. And let's say you need to get it down to 10 inches. So by starting with this piece of fabric, you can kind of figure out that you need it to be 50% smaller. So you'll adjust your stitch length and you'll adjust your tension. I've moved my tension up to 6.6 and my stitch length up. Now all I need to do is stitch along the edge of the foot. Now I'm not going to show you the result to that just yet. I then took another 20-inch piece of fabric and I reduced my tension to 5.2. I went ahead, I lined up the edge of the fabric with the edge of the foot, and I stitched it. Look at the different results that I got. The exact same fabric, the exact same thread, the same needle, the same foot. The only difference was the amount of tension that was put on those stitches as I was stitching. They were both 20 inches long. The one turned out to be like 7 inches, and the other one, 12 to 13 inches. What a difference. Now, what the other thing that I said could make a difference is the type of fabric that you're using. The fabric that you see here is 100% cotton. The fabric that you see here is 100% cotton. This pink fabric is an inexpensive piece of cotton that has a lot of sizing on it. This piece of cotton is very soft and pliable. So when I stitched this one, it gathered up much tighter than this one. As you can see, my tension was still set at 6.6, but the gathers are much looser. So when you're doing your testing, be sure you're using the right kind, the same fabric that you're going to use on your project. Now there's another cool thing that you can do with this gathering foot, and that is to create a gather or a ruffle at the same time you're stitching it onto your project. So what you do is take your fabric that you want to gather, put it on the machine right side up so the wrong side is touching the feed dogs. Then, I don't know if you noticed before, there's a little groove at the top of the gathering foot. And that groove allows you to insert a piece of fabric which will not be gathered when you stitch it. So the wrong side is up here. My stitch length, I did not leave it a 5.5. I reduced my stitch length to about a 3.0 to a 3.5 because this is going to be a seam as well as a ruffle, and I wanted to make sure that that seam held. So my tension is down to 5.8 and my stitch length was about probably 3.0. Now all you do is stitch that together, press it, and look what you've got. You've got your base piece of fabric attached to your ruffle all in one easy step.
Well, I hope you enjoyed that short 15-minute video, which was comprised of information taken from the 1-hour webinar. If you'd like to see 2 other 15-minute videos that highlight 2 other of my wonderful webinars, please just click on the link below. Thank you.